You always said I was cold. Now it's time for you to chill out forever. My daughter-in-law Cassandra's voice echoed through the industrial freezer as she slammed the heavy steel door. The metallic clang reverberated through my bones as darkness swallowed me whole. Her plan was simple: steal my $99 million fortune while I froze to death in her catering warehouse. But when she returned hours later to discover my body, I was sitting in her living room with a very big surprise. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. How did a 69-year-old grandmother end up locked in a commercial freezer by her own family? Well, let me backtrack and tell you exactly how I got here. My name is Dorothy Whitman, though everyone calls me Dot, and 6 months ago I thought I was the luckiest woman alive. My son, Michael, had just moved in with his new wife, Cassandra, to take care of me after my husband, Harold, passed. At least, that's what I believed. The truth started revealing itself 3 months ago when I overheard Cassandra on the phone in my study. $99 million, she whispered urgently. The old bat has $99 million just sitting there. Insurance money, Harold's business, investments. She's too senile to manage it properly. I froze in the hallway, my afternoon tea growing cold in my hands. Trust me, Marcus, once she's gone, Michael inherits everything. And what Michael inherits, I control. That night at dinner, Cassandra smiled sweetly as she served my favorite pot roast. Dot, you seem tired lately. Maybe we should look into getting you some help. Professional care. Michael nodded enthusiastically. Mom, Kaz is right. You've been forgetting things. Forgetting things. I'd built a multi-million-dollar portfolio alongside Harold, managed our household for 47 years, and still balanced my checkbook to the penny, but apparently I was forgetting things. The next week, Cassandra began her campaign in earnest. She hid my reading glasses, then acted concerned when I couldn't find them. She moved my medications to different cabinets, then worried aloud about my confusion. She even unplugged my bedroom clock and expressed alarm when I slept past my usual wake-up time. Each incident was small, innocent even, but together they painted a picture of a woman losing her grip on reality. Michael, bless his trusting heart, fell for every manipulation. Mom, maybe it's time to consider assisted living, he suggested one evening. Just temporarily until you feel more yourself. Assisted living? I'd seen this playbook before with Harold's mother. First comes temporary care, then power of attorney, then a mysterious decline in health. I wasn't about to become another cautionary tale. But I made a critical mistake. I let Cassandra know I was on to her. It happened on a Wednesday morning in early December. I was reviewing my investment statements when Cassandra walked into the study uninvited. Dot, you know, you don't need to worry about all those complicated financial papers anymore. Michael and I can handle everything. She reached for the documents with perfectly manicured nails that had never known a day of honest work. I'm perfectly capable of managing my own affairs, thank you, I said firmly, pulling the papers away. These accounts are in my name only. Her mask slipped for just a moment, and I saw something calculating flash across her face. Of course, Dot. I just thought it might be overwhelming for someone your age. Someone my age? I'd been hearing that phrase a lot lately. At the grocery store when I took an extra minute to choose the ripest tomatoes, at the bank when I carefully counted my cash before making a deposit, at the doctor's office when I asked questions about my medications. Suddenly, being thorough had become evidence of decline. Cassandra, I said, setting down my reading glasses and meeting her gaze directly, I know exactly what you're doing. The pretense vanished from her face like makeup washed away. I don't know what you mean, Dot. But her voice had changed, losing its syrupy sweetness. You're trying to convince Michael I'm incompetent so you can gain control of my finances. I heard your phone call about the $99 million. Cassandra went very still. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. You heard wrong. But we both knew she was lying. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees as we stared at each other across the mahogany desk that had belonged to Harold's father. Pack your bags, Cassandra, both of you. I want you out of my house by tomorrow. I stood up, trying to project confidence I didn't entirely feel. I'll be calling my lawyer first thing in the morning to ensure my will is ironclad. That's when her mask came off completely. You foolish old woman. Do you really think anyone will believe you over us? Michael thinks you're losing your mind. The neighbors think you're losing your mind. Even Dr. Peterson is concerned about your recent behavior. Recent behavior? I realized with growing horror how expertly she'd isolated me. The social invitations I allegedly declined but never received. The family gatherings where I was supposedly too confused to attend. The medical appointments where she'd accompanied me and spoke for me, describing symptoms I'd never experienced. Michael will never choose you over me, I said, but doubt crept into my voice. Won't he? Cassandra smiled, and it was like watching a snake prepare to strike. He already has. ... Every time he agreed you needed help. Every time he nodded when I expressed concern about your memory. Every time he failed to defend you when I mentioned your increasing confusion. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. Face it, Dot. You're already dead to him. You're just taking up space until we make it official. The words hit me like physical blows, but I refused to let her see me break. Get out of my house. My voice was steady. Thank God. Oh, we will, she said, heading for the door, but not the way you think. That evening, Michael approached me with the expression of someone delivering bad news. Mom, Cassandra told me about your conversation today. His voice was gentle but firm, the tone you'd use with a confused child. She's worried about you. We both are. Michael, your wife is trying to steal my money. The words sounded desperate, even to my own ears. She admitted it. She's been manipulating you, making you think I'm incompetent. My son's face crumpled with what looked like genuine pain. Mom, please, you're scaring me. These paranoid thoughts, the accusations, this isn't like you. Paranoid thoughts. How efficiently Cassandra had poisoned the well. Michael, I raised you. I know when someone is lying to your face. But even as I spoke, I could see the doubt in his eyes. She'd done her work too well. Cass thinks maybe we should have Dr. Peterson evaluate you, he said quietly, just to rule out any medical issues. Medical issues? Another step in the playbook. Next would come a diagnosis of dementia or Alzheimer's, carefully orchestrated with a doctor who was either fooled or bought. Then conservatorship, then death by natural causes. I'd seen it happen to Harold's wealthy Aunt Margaret. The pattern was always the same. I'm fine, Michael, but if it would make you feel better, I'll see Dr. Peterson next week. I needed time to think, to plan. Thank you, Mom. I know this is hard, but we love you. We just want what's best. The worst part was, I believed he meant it. Michael truly thought he was protecting me from myself. That night, I lay in bed listening to them talk in the room next door. Their voices were muffled, but I caught fragments. Has to be done carefully. Can't look suspicious. Inheritance laws are clear. No other way. I pulled my pillow over my head, but the words followed me into my dreams. The next morning, Cassandra was unusually cheerful. Dot, I thought we could spend the day together, just the two of us. I want to show you my catering warehouse. I'm so proud of what I've built. I should have been suspicious, but honestly, I was exhausted from the emotional warfare. A day away from the house sounded appealing. Her warehouse was impressive, I had to admit. I supply events all over the county, she explained, leading me through to commercial kitchen. Weddings, corporate functions, charity galas. It's taken 3 years to build this business. She seemed genuinely proud, and for a moment I wondered if I'd misjudged her. Maybe the phone call I'd overheard was taken out of context. Maybe my grief over Harold was making me paranoid. The freezer is my pride and joy, she continued, approaching a massive steel door. Rest Grade keeps everything at perfect temperature. She pulled the heavy door open, revealing a room-sized freezer lined with shelves filled with frozen food containers. Want to see inside? It's quite impressive. I stepped forward to look, and that's when she struck. The push wasn't violent, just firm enough to send me stumbling into the freezer. I spun around as the door began to close. "Cassandra!" But she was already speaking, her voice calm and matter-of-fact. "You always said I was cold, Dot. Now it's time for you to chill out forever." The lock clicked with a finality that made my blood freeze faster than the sub-zero air. I pounded on the steel door, shouting until my throat was raw, but the warehouse was soundproofed and isolated. No one would hear me. No one even knew where I was. The cold hit me immediately, seeping through my wool coat and straight into my bones. The freezer was massive, maybe 12 feet by 8 feet, with metal shelving units filled with frozen food containers. The temperature gauge read -10 degrees F. I had maybe 30 minutes before hypothermia became a real threat. But 30 minutes was longer than Cassandra expected me to last. She'd made one crucial mistake. She'd locked me in with her emergency supplies. Restaurant-grade freezers were required to have safety equipment, and there it was on the wall. An emergency blanket, a flashlight, and most importantly, an interior release handle that she'd apparently forgotten about. I wrapped myself in the emergency blanket and forced myself to think clearly. Cassandra would return in a few hours to discover my body. She'd called 911, crying about how poor, confused Dodd had wandered into the freezer and accidentally locked herself in. Michael would be devastated, but not surprised. After all, everyone knew I'd been having problems lately. The emergency release handle worked exactly as designed. I turned it slowly, hearing the lock mechanism disengage. But I didn't open the door. Not yet. Instead, I cracked it just enough to let in some warmer air and began to plan. If Cassandra thought I was dead, she'd drop her guard. And that's when I'd learn exactly how deep this conspiracy went. I spent the next hour searching through her freezer inventory. What I found made my blood boil, despite the cold. Hidden behind boxes of frozen vegetables were documents in waterproof containers, copies of forged medical records showing progressive dementia, a power of attorney document with my signature expertly forged. Most damning of all, a detailed timeline of my planned decline leading to my inevitable death from natural causes. But the most shocking discovery was a life insurance policy I'd never seen before. $5 million with Michael as the beneficiary. The paperwork dated just 2 months ago. The signature was a perfect forgery of my handwriting. Cassandra hadn't just planned to steal my existing fortune. She had insured me like livestock. The warehouse door opened around 3 p.m. I heard Cassandra's footsteps, deliberately slow and hesitant, as if she was approaching something she dreaded finding. "Dot!" she called out, her voice perfectly pitched with concern. "Dot, are you in here? I've been looking everywhere for you." I listened for my hiding spot behind the kitchen prep counter as she made her way to the freezer. The performance was Oscar-worthy. Gasps of horror, frantic calls to 911, sobbing explanations about her confused mother-in-law who'd wandered off. She must have gotten lost and accidentally locked herself in. Oh, God, this is all my fault. I should have been watching her more carefully. The paramedics arrived within minutes. I heard them discussing the scene, taking Cassandra's statement, calling for the coroner. "Poor woman," one of them said. "These dementia cases are always tragic. Family never wants to believe how far gone they really are." After everyone left, I waited another hour before emerging from my hiding place. The warehouse was dark and quiet. Perfect. I made my way to Cassandra's office and began photographing everything with my phone. The forged documents, the insurance policy, even her computer files, which she'd carelessly left open. But the best evidence was still to come. Hidden in her desk drawer was a handwritten journal detailing every step of her plan. How she'd researched Harold's death to perfect her technique. How she'd studied other inheritance scams. How she'd practiced forging my signature. Most chilling of all, how she'd calculated that my death would net them over $100 million once the insurance payout was included. By 6 p.m., I was sitting in Cassandra's living room with all the evidence spread across her coffee table. The front door key was exactly where I thought it would be, under the fake rock by the roses, because some people never change their patterns. I'd made myself comfortable, poured a glass of her expensive wine, and settled in to wait. The look on her face when she walked through that door was worth every minute I'd spent in that freezer. Cassandra's scream could have shattered crystal. She dropped her purse and car keys, stumbling backward into the doorframe as if she'd seen an actual ghost, which, from her perspective, she had. "Hello, dear," I said calmly, taking a sip of her wine. "I hope you don't mind that I let myself in. We need to talk." Her face cycled through shock, terror, and finally anger with remarkable speed. "You? How did you—" She couldn't seem to form complete sentences. "How did I escape your little freezer trap? Or how did I discover your adorable journal?" I held up the leather-bound book where she documented my planned murder. Really, Cassandra, keeping written records of felonies is rather amateur. She tried to regain her composure, straightening her shoulders and lifting her chin. "I don't know what you think you found, but nothing." I opened the journal to a random page and began reading aloud. Day 43. Dot is becoming suspicious. Need to accelerate timeline. Michael completely convinced of her decline. Dr. Peterson's scheduled for next week to provide dementia diagnosis as discussed. The color drained from her face. "You broke into my private property. That's illegal." I laughed, surprising myself with how genuine it sounded. "Oh, sweetheart, we passed illegal about the time you locked me in a freezer to die. Everything else is just bookkeeping." She glanced around the room as if looking for escape routes or weapons. Smart girl. "Where's Michael?" I asked conversationally. "I assume he's planning my funeral arrangements. Poor boy must be devastated by his mother's tragic accident." Her jaw tightened. "Michael doesn't know anything about this." "This being your plan to murder me for my inheritance?" "No, I don't imagine he does. Michael may be gullible, but he's not a killer." I set down my wine glass and leaned forward. "But you are, aren't you, Cassandra? This isn't your first time, is it?" Her eyes went wide. "I don't know what you're talking about," but her voice betrayed her. "Let me guess. A previous husband or boyfriend who died under mysterious circumstances? An elderly relative who left you money? Someone else who was foolish enough to trust you?" She moved toward the kitchen. I knew she was going for either a weapon or her phone. "I wouldn't," I warned, "not unless you want me to send these photos to the police right now." I held up my phone, showing her the screen full of evidence I'd documented. Every forged signature, every fraudulent document, every word of your precious journal, all date-stamped and backed up to cloud storage. Cassandra froze halfway to the kitchen. "What do you want?" The question confirmed everything I needed to know. If she'd been innocent, she would have demanded I leave or threatened to call the police. Instead, she was ready to negotiate. "What I want is simple. I want you to pack your bags and disappear tonight, forever." "You can't be serious." "Oh, but I am. You have two choices, dear. You can leave voluntarily and never contact Michael or me again, or you can wait for the police to arrest you for attempted murder, fraud, forgery, and insurance fraud. I'm told federal prison is particularly unpleasant for pretty young women." She tried a different approach, tears welling in her eyes. "Dot, please. I know how this looks, but I love Michael. I would never hurt him." "You don't love Michael. You love what Michael represents, access to my money. But here's what you fail to understand about my son. He may be trusting, but he has a moral compass. When he learns what you tried to do to his mother, he'll be the one calling the police." The tears vanished as quickly as they'd appeared. "Michael will never believe you. Everyone thinks you're losing your mind. I made sure of that." "Yes, you did excellent work there, very thorough. But you made one fatal mistake. I stood up, gathering the evidence from the coffee table. You documented everything. Every lie, every manipulation, every step of your plan. Even a public defender could get a conviction with this evidence. The front door opened, and we both turned to see Michael walking in. His face was puffy from crying, his hair disheveled. He looked like a man who'd lost everything that mattered to him. "Cass," he called out, "I got your message about Mom." His voice trailed off as he saw me standing in his living room, very much alive. "Hello, sweetheart," I said gently. "I'm sorry you had to go through that scare today." Michael's legs seemed to give out. He grabbed the doorframe for support, staring at me as if I might disappear. But Cassandra called me. She said you were dead, that you'd gotten confused and locked yourself in her freezer." I did get locked in her freezer, I confirmed, but not because I was confused. I held up Cassandra's journal. "Your wife tried to murder me, Michael, and this documents the entire plan." His face went through the same cycle Cassandra's had. Shock, confusion, disbelief. "That's impossible. Mom, you must have misunderstood." "Read it yourself." I handed him the journal, watching his expression change as he absorbed his wife's carefully documented plan to kill me and steal our family's fortune. When he reached the page about the forged insurance policy, his hands began to shake. "Cass?" His voice was barely a whisper. "Tell me this isn't real." Cassandra had been calculating her next move while he read. Now she tried one last manipulation. "Michael, honey, your mother has been paranoid and confused for months. She broke into our house. She's making wild accusations. Maybe she wrote that journal herself during one of her episodes." For a moment, I thought she might succeed. Michael wanted so desperately to believe the best of everyone. But then he reached the page where she'd written about their insurance discussion. "You asked me about Mom's life insurance 3 weeks ago," he said slowly. "You said it was for estate planning, but according to this, you already knew about a policy that Mom never mentioned." "Michael," she started, but he was flipping through more pages. "You documented conversations we never had, meetings with doctors I've never heard of. Cassandra, some of these entries are from before we even moved in with Mom." The truth was dawning on him with painful clarity. "How long have you been planning this?" She made one final attempt at deflection. "Your mother is manipulating you. She's jealous of our marriage, of our happiness. She can't stand that you love someone more than her." But Michael was reading a page about how easy it would be to convince her spineless husband that his mother needed to die. "Spineless husband?" His voice was deadly quiet. "That's what you really think of me?" Cassandra's composure finally cracked completely. "You are spineless. You let your mother control every aspect of your life. You've never stood up to her once. You're 40 years old and still run to Mommy for everything." The insults poured out like poison from a broken bottle. Every cruel thought she'd hidden behind her sweet smile. Every manipulation she'd used to control him. Michael listened with growing horror as his wife revealed who she really was beneath the mask. "And yes, I planned to kill the old bat. Someone had to. She was never going to die naturally. And that money was being wasted on someone too senile to appreciate it." The silence that followed was deafening. Michael set the journal down carefully and walked to the phone. "What are you doing?" Cassandra demanded. "Calling the police." His voice was steady now, resolute. "Mom, do you have evidence besides the journal?" I pulled out my phone and showed him the photos I'd taken. Forged documents, fraudulent insurance policies, medical records that were fabricated. Everything's documented. As Michael dialed 911, Cassandra made a run for the door. But she'd forgotten one crucial thing. I might be 69, but I'd raised a son as a single mother after his father left. I knew how to handle myself in a crisis. The wine bottle made a satisfying thud when it connected with her ankle. She went down hard, and by the time she'd recovered, Michael was blocking the exit. "Don't make this worse than it already is, Cass." The police arrived within minutes. As they cuffed Cassandra and read her rights, she spat one final insult at me. "You should have just died quietly like you were supposed to." But I was done being quiet. I was done being manipulated, and I was definitely done being underestimated. As they loaded her into the patrol car, I realized something wonderful had happened in that freezer. The old, trusting Dorothy Whitman had died in there. The woman who'd emerged was someone new. Someone stronger, someone who would never again let anyone make her feel small or insignificant. That night, as Michael and I sat in my kitchen drinking tea and processing what had happened, he asked the question I'd been dreading. Mom, how could I have been so blind? How did I not see what she was doing to you? I reached across the table and took his hand because you loved her, sweetheart. And love makes us want to believe the best in people. But sometimes, I thought to myself, the best thing love can do is open our eyes to the truth, even when that truth is cold enough to freeze your heart. 3 weeks after Cassandra's arrest, I was sitting in Detective Richardson's office, learning just how deep the rabbit hole went. Mrs. Whitman, your daughter-in-law's real name isn't Cassandra Mills, he said, sliding a file across his desk. It's Jennifer Cash, and she has quite a history. I opened the file to photos of a woman who looked exactly like Cassandra, but with different hair, different clothes, different names. Jennifer Cash married Robert Turner in Phoenix, 2019. He died 6 months later in a hiking accident. Left her everything. Detective Richardson pointed to another photo. Then she became Caroline Miller in Denver, married to Frank Wilson. Heart attack in his sleep, age 52. No previous cardiac issues. The pattern was sickeningly familiar. How many? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. 7, that we've confirmed. She's been doing this for over a decade, moving from state to state, changing identities. You're the first victim who survived to tell about it. 7 men. 7 families destroyed. 7 fortunes stolen. The FBI wants to interview you, Richardson continued. This case could help them close multiple suspicious deaths across the country. I thought about those other families, other children who'd lost parents to this monster. Of course, whatever you need. Michael was struggling with the revelation that his wife of 2 years was essentially a professional black widow. How could I not have seen it? He asked for the 100th time as we sat in my garden. Mom, I brought a serial killer into our home. You brought home someone you loved, I corrected gently. The fact that she fooled you doesn't make you weak, sweetheart. It makes you human. But privately, I was reviewing every interaction I'd had with Cassandra, looking for signs I'd missed. The charm offensive had been perfect, I had to admit it. The media attention was overwhelming. Black Widow's plot foiled by quick-thinking grandmother, read one headline. Senior citizen outsmarts serial killer, proclaimed another. Reporters camped outside my house for days until I finally agreed to one television interview just to make them go away. What advice would you give to other seniors who might be targeted by someone like Jennifer Cash? The interviewer asked. I considered the question carefully. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. And never, ever be ashamed to ask for help. But the real challenge wasn't dealing with reporters. It was dealing with the financial aftermath of Cassandra's schemes. She'd managed to open 3 credit cards in my name, forged checks totaling nearly $50,000, and somehow accessed one of my smaller investment accounts. It'll take months to sort out, my attorney explained. Banking fraud cases are notoriously complex. At least Michael was helping now, instead of enabling my would-be killer. He'd thrown himself into untangling the financial mess with an energy that bordered on obsessive. I need to fix this, he insisted. I need to make up for what I let happen. We were becoming a team in a way we'd never been before. The FBI interview was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in February. Agent Patricia Vance was a nonsense woman in her 40s who looked like she'd seen everything and been surprised by none of it. Mrs. Whitman, I need you to walk me through every interaction you had with the suspect, no matter how trivial it might seem. For 3 hours, I recounted every conversation, every gesture, every moment that had felt off. Agent Vance took notes constantly, occasionally asking for clarification. She asked about your medications very early in the relationship, she observed. That's consistent with her previous patterns. She researches her victims' health conditions to plan appropriate causes of death. The thought that Cassandra had been studying me like a lab rat from day one was nauseating. How did she choose her victims? I asked. Online obituaries mostly. She'd target recently widowed men with significant assets and adult children who lived far away, men who were lonely and vulnerable. But she chose Michael, I pointed out, not Harold. Agent Vance nodded grimly. Her methods were evolving. Marrying the son instead of the target allowed her to manipulate from inside the family structure. Plus, your fortune was significantly larger than her previous scores. Significantly larger. It still felt surreal that my careful lifetime of saving and investing had made me a target for murder. The insurance policy she forged, I asked, would it have been valid? Absolutely. She'd become very sophisticated in her document fraud. If you had died, Michael would have received that $5 million payout, and as his wife, she'd have had access to it. After the interview, I drove to the cemetery where Harold was buried. I sat by his headstone and told him everything that had happened. "I wish you were here to see this," I said aloud, feeling only slightly foolish. "You always said I was tougher than I looked." A cold February wind stirred the bare branches above me, and for a moment I could almost hear his voice. "Damn right you are, Dot." The financial recovery was progressing slowly, but steadily. My bank had been remarkably cooperative once they understood the scope of the fraud. "We're implementing new security measures," the branch manager assured me. "This kind of systematic identity theft has become increasingly sophisticated." Michael had insisted on moving back home temporarily to help me reorganize my affairs. "I don't want you dealing with this alone," he said. It was nice having him around, though I could see the guilt eating at him. He'd grown thinner, more serious. The boy who'd always seen the best in everyone had learned that sometimes people's worst impulses win. "You know this isn't your fault," I told him one evening as we reviewed credit card statements. "Cass was a professional, Michael. This is what she did for a living." He looked up from the papers, his eyes red-rimmed from exhaustion. "I should have listened to you when you tried to warn me. I chose her over you." "You chose love over suspicion," I corrected. "In most circumstances, that would be the right choice." Spring arrived early that year, and with it came unexpected news. Agent Vance called on a Thursday morning with information that changed everything. "Mrs. Whitman, we've been analyzing Jennifer Cash's financial records, and we found something interesting. She has a storage unit in Denver with contents that might belong to her previous victims." The storage unit was like a trophy room for a serial killer. Photo albums from weddings that had ended in murder, jewelry taken from dead men's homes, documents from forged wills and insurance policies. And in the back, behind boxes of stolen mementos, was a safe containing over $2 million in cash and gold coins. "This represents the liquid assets she accumulated from 7 murders," Agent Vance explained. "Under federal asset forfeiture laws, this money will be distributed to the victims' families." I thought about those families, children and grandchildren who lost inheritances to Cassandra's greed. At least they'd get something back. But the most shocking discovery was a detailed notebook outlining her next targets. She had plans for at least 5 more victims, Agent Vance revealed, including a retired professor in Maine and a widowed business owner in California. You stopping her likely saved multiple lives. The trial was scheduled for September. Jennifer Cash, a.k.a. Cassandra Mills, had been charged with 7 counts of murder in the first degree, multiple counts of fraud, and attempted murder. Her public defender was pushing for an insanity plea, but the prosecution had her journal documenting years of careful planning. "She's going to claim she was mentally ill," the prosecutor explained during our preparation meeting. But your testimony about her calculated behavior will help prove premeditation. I was ready to testify, more than ready. I wanted every detail of her manipulations exposed in open court. Michael had started seeing a therapist to deal with what he called his broken trust radar. I need to understand how I let this happen, he explained. Not just for me, but in case I ever want to have another relationship. The fact that he was taking responsibility for his own healing gave me hope. Meanwhile, I was discovering that surviving attempted murder had given me a new perspective on life. Little annoyances that used to bother me seemed trivial now. Rude cashiers, long lines, even the persistent reporters who still occasionally called for follow-up interviews. None of it mattered anymore. "You seem different," my neighbor Mrs. Patterson observed as we worked in our adjoining gardens. "More peaceful somehow." She was right. Having looked death in the face and won, I felt oddly liberated. "I suppose I've learned not to waste energy on things I can't control," I replied. The one thing I could control was how I used the second chance I'd been given. I'd started volunteering with elder advocacy groups, sharing my story to help other seniors recognize the warning signs of financial abuse. "Trust your instincts," I'd tell them. "If someone seems too good to be true, they probably are." The trial began on a crisp September morning. Jennifer Cash looked smaller in her orange jumpsuit, her carefully maintained appearance replaced by the harsh reality of county jail. She avoided eye contact as I took the witness stand, but I could feel her presence like a cold draft. "Mrs. Whitman," the prosecutor began, "please tell the jury about the defendant's behavior in the months before she attempted to kill you." For 2 hours, I recounted every manipulation, every lie, every calculated move she'd made to isolate me and convince my son I was losing my mind. The defense attorney tried to make me seem confused during cross-examination. "Mrs. Whitman, you're 69 years old. Isn't it possible you misinterpreted some of these interactions?" His condescending tone reminded me why I disliked lawyers for most of my adult life. "Young man," I said firmly, "I may be 69, but I built a multi-million-dollar investment portfolio, raised a son as a single mother, and survived being locked in a freezer by a serial killer. My mind is quite sharp. Thank you." Several jurors smiled at that. The most powerful moment when they played the recording from Cassandra's warehouse security system, her voice cold and calculating as she called 911 to report my accidental death, filled the courtroom. She must have gotten confused and locked herself in. "Oh, God, this is all my fault." Michael testified the next day about how she'd manipulated him into believing I was incompetent. His voice broke when he described finding her journal, reading her true thoughts about him and his spineless character. The jury watched him with obvious sympathy, but the prosecution's strongest evidence was Cassandra's own words. Her journal entries, read aloud in her own handwriting, revealed a cold-blooded killer who saw murder as simply a business transaction. Target elderly, isolated, wealthy, gain trust through family connection, establish pattern of decline, execute when opportune. The defense's insanity plea fell apart when the prosecutor presented evidence of her careful research and planning. Ladies and gentlemen, this defendant spent months studying probate law, practicing forgery, and researching hypothermia death rates. This is not the behavior of someone who's mentally ill. This is the behavior of someone who's evil. Jennifer Cash was convicted on all counts. As the jury foreman read the verdict, she finally looked at me for just a moment. Her mask slipped completely, and I saw pure hatred in her eyes. Good. I wanted her to know that she'd failed, that the foolish old woman she'd tried to kill was the reason she'd spend the rest of her life in prison. The judge sentenced her to 7 consecutive life terms without possibility of parole. "Mrs. Cash," he said, "you are a predator who has destroyed families and taken lives for nothing more than financial gain. Society needs protection from people like you." As they led her away in shackles, I felt something I hadn't expected. Pity. Not for what she'd face in prison, but for what she'd become. Somewhere along the way, she'd chosen to see other human beings as nothing more than sources of income. That was its own kind of death. 1 year after the trial, I was cleaning out Harold's office when I found a letter he'd hidden in his desk drawer. My name was written on the envelope in his careful handwriting, along with instructions for Dot to read only if something terrible happens to her. Inside was a confession that changed everything I thought I knew about my marriage. My dearest Dot, it began. If you're reading this, then someone has tried to hurt you and you need to know the truth about our finances. Harold had apparently suspected that his successful investment strategies might eventually make me a target. The letter revealed that our net worth was actually much higher than I'd known. Harold had been secretly moving money into hidden accounts and trusts, protecting our assets in ways I'd never understood. The 99 million Cassandra knew about is just the tip of the iceberg, he'd written. I've left detailed instructions with our attorney for accessing the real accounts, but only if you're ever in genuine danger. According to Harold's carefully documented records, our actual net worth was closer to $250 million. He'd been quietly investing and protecting our money for decades, creating a financial fortress that would survive any attempt at theft or manipulation. I never told you because I wanted you to live without fear, the letter continued. But if someone has tried to take our life's work, then you need every weapon I can give you. The final revelation was the most shocking of all. Harold had suspected that someone might eventually try to harm me for our money, so he'd set up a foundation in my name that would be activated only upon my death. If Cassandra had succeeded in killing me, she would have discovered that 90% of our fortune was already pledged to charity, leaving only enough for Michael to live comfortably. She would have murdered you for pocket change, my attorney explained when we reviewed the documents. Your husband, essentially, booby-trapped your inheritance against gold diggers. I had to laugh at the elegant justice of it all. Even from beyond the grave, Harold was still protecting me. I decided to activate the foundation while I was alive to see it work. The Harold and Dorothy Whitman Foundation for Elder Safety would fund programs to protect seniors from financial abuse. Our first grant went to a legal aid organization that provided free representation to elderly victims of fraud. Michael had found love again, this time with a kindergarten teacher named Sarah, who thought our family's survival story was inspiring rather than profitable. They'd had a quiet courthouse wedding the previous month, and I'd never seen my son happier. I'm not making the same mistakes twice, he'd told me. Sarah and I dated for 2 years, and I made sure she loved me before she ever knew about our family's money. As I sat in my garden on a warm October afternoon, I reflected on how much had changed since that day in Cassandra's freezer. I'd learned that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined, that intuition was more valuable than politeness, and that sometimes the people who try to destroy us end up revealing our own power. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Agent Vance with news that Jennifer Cash had been linked to 3 additional murders in states where she'd lived before her identity change spree. Your survival and testimony helped us build cases that will bring justice for 11 families, she said. You should be proud of that. Proud? Yes, I was proud. Proud that I'd trusted my instincts, proud that I'd fought back, proud that I'd survived. But mostly, I was proud that I'd learned to value my own life enough to protect it. That evening, as I watched the sunset from my back porch, I raised a glass of Harold's favorite wine and a toast to second chances, to resilience, and to the powerful lesson that no one gets to decide you're disposable except you. The future stretched ahead of me, bright with possibilities I'd almost lost, to a woman who saw me as nothing more than a bank account with a pulse. But Dorothy Whitman wasn't going anywhere, and God help anyone who tried to make me disappear again. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.